future reference. And then here is our schedule for the spring quarter that we have so far. So like I said, today we have the Python workshop. And then next week, we are planning to have a informational session about the quantitative analysis concentration. And we hopefully will have some senior quant students as well as some master's students who are doing business analytics come and talk about their experiences at Cal Poly. And then the 4 weeks after that, we have 4 big companies lined up. Week 4 is Indeed.com, which is the job search company. Week 5 is PwC. Week 6, Zendesk. And then week 7, we have eBay coming to talk. And then week 8, we are planning on having a more advanced Python workshop. So we'll keep you updated on that.
Alrighty. Also, the spring career fair is coming up. This is going to happen all virtually via Zoom. The 2 dates are April 14th and 15th, Wednesday and Thursday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. On Wednesday, we have 65 employers attending, and Thursday, we have 42 employers attending. All majors are welcome and open to come to this, secure a possible job or internship, as well as sign up for group sessions or one-on-ones. The Zoom, not Zoom link, but the link for that is also posted in the chat.
Okay, and then also on April 14th from 6 to 8 p.m., OCOB is hosting a diversity, equity, and inclusion town hall. So I'll read the OCOB's little blurb about this. They're saying, OCOB DEI Action Committee is hosting a college-wide town hall event for all OCOB students, faculty, and staff to voice their opinions and recommendations on the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion within our college. The goal is to bring all members of the OCOB community together to heal and explore how we can support each other as a college, university, and I don't know why I can't read the rest of their blurb. But anyways, highly recommend you guys go to that, save that date. I'm not sure if they're going to be, I think Adrian posted the link with more information in the chat. So save that date and make sure you go and get your voice heard.
So the internship that we're highlighting this week is a business analyst internship from the Jet Propulsion Lab. So the Jet Propulsion Lab is part of NASA. It's a federally funded research center, and they work on like rocket engines and things like that. So for this role, you'll be doing administrative tasks for the Communication and Education Directorate. And some of those tasks include assisting with budgets, financial reporting, and then utilizing institutional tools. And so some of the things that they're looking for are experience in Excel, SharePoint, Power BI, and Power Pivot. So if this sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out. The link is in the chat, in the Zoom chat, and it's also posted on our Slack on the internship channel.
Alrighty. Also, always feel free to contact us. We have two ways for you guys to reach out to us. The first is Instagram on the left. Our Instagram handle is @CalPolyQuac. Our Gmail is cpquac@gmail.com. And if you use your phone and scan this QR code, it'll bring you to the mailing list. The QUAC mailing list essentially just keeps you up with all the events, internships, any speakers, any meetings we're having in the future. And the link of that is also posted in the Zoom chat.
You can also get connected with us through our Slack channel. There you can get weekly updates on upcoming meetings, workshops, and more. And the link is also getting posted in the chat to join that as well.
And we have a suggestion box. So if you guys have any suggestions for us, we're always looking to improve. QUAC is like for you guys. So if there's anything you guys want to see, definitely like put it in the suggestion box. And the link for that is in the chat. And then you can also just scan the QR code.
All right, so QUAC has a new prize point system, and this flyer will also be on our Instagram if you want to look at it up close. But if you come to every meeting, you'll get a point, and there's a bunch more other rules listed out. So, if you want to win a cash or gift card prize, follow the rules. And if you guys want to fill out the attendance system to get your first point, the QR code is right there.
All right, so today's workshop is going to be on just the Python basics. But before we get started, if anyone was trying to download Python or PyCharm and had any problems, if you have any questions, you can let us know right now before we get into it. or just give a thumbs up if you got downloaded. All right, cool. So Conan will now start us off with the first topic for our Python workshop.
All right, yeah, let me share my screen real quick. Okay. So when you're like programming, pretty much everything is just made up of data. So when you're programming, you just have data and you manipulate data to like just do various things. So I'm gonna start off by talking about the types of data that's in Python. So let me just write this out. Okay, so what I did just now, this is just a comment. So if you put like a hashtag before some words, it just means that like that code, like what I write, it won't get run. So I'm just gonna do this to kind of like organize what I'm saying. So there's three main types of data. So the first type I like to think about are kind of just like numbers. And the numbers are made up of two types. There's integers and floats. And I'll talk about that in a second. And the second type are called strings. And the last type is a Boolean. So let me give you an example of each. So let's say integers. Integers are just whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 45, 67, things like that. And then floats are numbers that have decimals in it. So things like 2.2, 2.3, or 2.3, 5.6, and even something like 1.0. And then let's move on to the next type of data, which are strings. So strings are pretty much just kind of like words. And the way you create a string is you can either use this key right here. This is all, it's like a single quote, or you can use the double quote. And inside the two quotes, you just type in something. And those are both strings. So strings are made up of characters, and characters are pretty much individual little letters. And the space is also a character as well. And Booleans, there's only two types of Booleans. There's just true and false. So that's it. They just represent true or false values. Okay, so let's run our code and let's just see what happens real quick. So if you run it, you might notice that you get an error. And the reason why you get an error is because like you can't just have data floating around in Python. If you want to use data, you need to store it somewhere. And the way we store things is by using variables. So let's create a variable. I'll call this var1. So your variable can be named anything. It just has to start with a lowercase letter. And then you can put numbers, like underscores, dashes. I think you can put like a question mark or something too if you really want to. But yeah, it has just to start with a lowercase letter. Some words specifically can't be used for variables, like if I type in for or in or like list, and you can see that they're all different color, and that's kind of how you can tell. Those are called like, I think, like key terms or keywords or something. So you can't use those for your variable names. So, okay, so now that we have our name for the variable, we need to assign it a value. And the way that you assign it a value is just by pressing equals, and then you type in the value that you want to do. So then you have var5. All right, and you can do this for all types of variables. So let me comment all this out. Oops. Oh my God. So I just did like a group comment. The way you can do that is you just highlight, and then I'm on Mac, so I just do command dash, and it just does that. So if I print out this var1.
If you're on Windows, it's control dash.
So if you print out var1, you can see that it comes out here. So var1 is equal to 5. All right, now Zoo's going to talk about some of the operations that you can do when you have variables.
Yeah. So before we move on to the next stage or next topic, does anyone have any questions? You can either unmute yourself and talk, or you can put your question in the chat if you have it. And if you have any questions along the way, you can feel free to put in the chat as well, or unmute your mic and say your question. All right, so we'll get started with the operations portion of our workshop. So essentially what Con covered was the data types that you can have within Python. So now we need to know what we can do with those data types in order to get some sort of results. So the first type of operation are number operations. So this just includes like your typical math functions or your math operations like plus, minus, divide, which is noted by a slash, or multiply, which is an asterisk, or exponent, which is denoted as 2 asterisks. So just to test it out, we can print, let's say 2 plus 2, and then that you can see is 4 right here. And then you can obviously check all the other ones as well. But there's 2 unique ones that are used mostly for programming, and that is, one of them is called floor divide, which is noted by 2 slashes. And essentially what this does is it just cuts off any decimals that you have when dividing a number. So for example, if we want to floor divide, let's say 7 floor divided by 3. So 7 divided by 3 is what, 2, or it's 2.11 or 2.333. So in that case, the 0.333 is just going to get cut off, and we should just get 2 when we divide this. Yeah, so we can see that our second output here was 2. And I will comment this out so we just get what we need. Yeah, so you can see that 7 floor divided by 3 is 2, and all the decimals are gone. And the thing with this is it doesn't round down or it doesn't round up. So even if we do, let's say 5 divided by 3, which should give us 1.666, instead of rounding up to 2, it just cuts off the decimals and just gives you a 1. So that's one unique thing that's mostly used for programming, and the other is called the modulus, which is noted by the percentage sign. So what modulus does is I don't know if you remember like simple dividing when you're learning it in elementary school or whatever, but when you divide a number, you usually have a remainder after if it's not divided fully. So for example, if we have 4 modulus, sorry, let me print this out. If we have 4 modulus 3, that should give you, so 3 goes into 4 one whole time, and then since there's 1 left over, 4 modulus 3. So since there's 1 left over, the remainder is 1. So that way, the output for this should be 1, since the modulus function gives you the remainder of that division operation. So if we run this, we can see that indeed the output for that is 1. And one big use that most people do, or most people use modulus for, is determining whether a number is even or odd. So what to do, or how to do that, is that you modulus any number by 2, and if it's 0, it's denoted as a even number, and if it's odd, and if the output is 1, it's denoted as an odd number. So you can see if we put 6, 0, if we put 7, it's 1, and then so on and so forth. So that's one easy way to tell whether a number is odd or even. So lastly, we'll get into our Boolean operations, which there are 3 of them. One is and, the other one's or, and the other one's not. So first we're gonna go look at and. So Booleans, like Conan mentioned, were just true or false. So our Boolean operations is comparing two Booleans. So if it's true and true, this should print out to be true. So and is determining whether the 2 operations that you put on each side of the and function are the same. So if it's true and false, both are not true, so therefore it becomes false. And then false and false should turn out to be false. So for the and, both sides have to be true in order for that expression to evaluate to true. So we're going to copy this, we're going to paste here. So the other one I said was or. So this one, either or can be true, and it'll be evaluated to true. So if we say true or false, we can see that it evaluates to be true. And then true or true is true, and then false or false is false. False. And then the last one is the not Boolean operator. So you just type out not true. And then what this should give is just the opposite of whatever Boolean you put after the not. So if it's not true, then therefore it's false. And then if it's not false, it's true. So yeah, that is all the operations that we have for this workshop.
Okay, before we move on, does anyone have any questions on what we covered so far? No? All right. Let's move on.
Can we refresh super quickly which ones we were doing? So true, or like all of them, I guess, for Boolean.
So
Sorry,
you were mentioning about the Boolean operators here?
Yeah, the operators.
Yeah, so which one do you have a question on?
Just like, it's just the three, right? So false and false, true or false, and then.
Yeah, so you can put whatever you want here. You can either put true and false.
Yeah.
So obviously these are just you can switch them out for either true or false since there's only 2 Booleans available. So this one, both have to be true in order to evaluate to true, and then this one just 1, and then this one just gives you the opposite. All right, cool.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about lists. So now that you know about like operations and like variables, like you want to store like, let's say you want to store like a group of like things, that's what you would use a list for. So to create a list, let's create an empty list first. So let's call it list 1. So we name it list 1, and then you create it by pressing a bracket key, and then PyCharm should add the second bracket key in it. And that creates an empty list. But you don't have to just create a list that's empty. You can create a list that has things already in it. So we do the same thing, we just create brackets, but then inside what we do is we fill in our values, 1, 2, 3, and then let's make this one true. Let's make this one high. So you separate all individual like elements inside a list are separated by a comma, and you can put all types of data inside a list. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be all numbers or all Booleans or all strings. You can have anything in it. So now that we have this list, like what can we do with it? So you can like access individual elements inside a list. And the way you do that is by using their index. So you can see like this first one right here. You might think it's at the first position, but in programming, it starts at 0. So this has a position of 0, index of 0, has an index of 1, index of 2, index of 3, and an index of 4. So let's access one of the elements. So let's say, let's create a variable called element, right? And then how do we access it? So first we need to type in the name of the list that we want to access. So that's list 2. And then we put brackets. And then inside this bracket, we put the index of the element that we want to access. So let's say I want to access this 3.5. It has an index of 2. So I put in list 2 and then 2. And then if we print out element and run this, you can see it prints out 3.5. So one other cool thing that you can do is you can kind of like replace values inside a list also using the index. So let's say I want to change this true to a false. So what I would do is first type in the name of the list that I want to change. Oops, wrong one. Type in the index of the element that I want to change. So true has the index of 3, and then equals, and then to false. So if you run it, you can't really see anything that happens. But if I print out the list after I do that, you can see that the false or the true has changed to false. So what can we do with this empty list? Or like one thing you can do is just add things to a list. So because there's no like indexes or anything in it, you can't really access indexes to add things to it. So what you can do is append something, and append just means to add on, and append adds something onto the end. So the way we would do that is type in the name of the list we want to add something to. Then we do dot append. Oops. And then inside these parentheses, we put in the thing that we want to append. So I'm going to put in my name. And if we print out the list after we append, you can see that the empty list now has my name inside of it. And let's say I want to remove something. You kind of can do the same thing. Type in the name of the list that you want to remove something from, then just type in remove, and then type in the thing that you want to remove. So let's type in my name. And if you print out the list again, you can see that now the list is empty. So does anyone have any questions about indexes and accessing things and appending or removing?
When you're like adding something to like, let's say list 2, can you add it in like a specific spot, or does it only just add it to the end?
So not with append. So I think Python has another method. It's called insert. So I think if we should do like list2 dot insert. So we type in the index of where we want it to be. So let's say I want it to be at the second index, and then let's type in like my name. And then if we print out list2, oops, you can see that at index 2, now my name is there.
Okay, cool.
So that's how you would do it. So yeah, these things are called methods, like the dot, like, you know, and it applies this like thing to the object that it's kind of attached to. So there's like a bunch of other methods. There's like too many I just covered today. So if you're interested, you can just like check it out. Like just look up Python list methods and you'll find a bunch of like stuff you can do. All right, so let's say I want to access, oh, does anyone else have any more questions? All good? All right. So let's say I want to access multiple elements inside the list. So let's say I want to select the first 3 elements. How can I do that? So you can use something called list splicing. And basically the way it works is you type in the name of the list, and then you type in the start index, so where I want to start, and then you just type in the stop index plus 1. So let me just give you an example. So let's say I want to access the 0 to 2, right? So I want 1, 2, and then 3.5. So I'm starting at index 0, and then I want 2. So I have to give it 3. So what basically, like, the start is inclusive. So it'll include where you specify the start, but the stop is exclusive. So you need to give it an index 1 more than what you actually want. So now if I print out sublist, you can see I have 1, 2, and 3.5. So yeah, any questions on list splicing? All right, I'm going to move on to functions. So what is a function? So a function just takes in 2 things, an input, and it produces an output. So what's an example of like a function? Print is a function. It takes in like anything and it puts it right here. So you can kind of make your own. Python has a lot of like predefined functions, and like if you type in like a len or like a range, you can see how like these words are blue, and the blue like words are Python's pre-built functions. But if we really want to, we can make our own functions. So to make your own function, you start off by writing def, and def stands for define, right? And then you type in the name of the function. So let's say I want a function that adds 2 numbers together. So I'll do add. That's the name. Now I need to specify what the inputs of that function are. So to do that, you do parentheses, and then you just give it 2 variable names. So let's say A and B. And then what you need to do after is put a colon. And the colon lets Python know that all code after this belongs to the function. And like a way you can tell that you're inside the functions code is if you press enter, you are indented. So that's how you know the code that you're writing is going to be part of the function. So let's create a variable, the sum equals A plus B. Okay. So now let's call our function. So let's say result is equal to add, and we'll say 2 and 2. And we want to print result. So as you can see, nothing got returned. That doesn't make sense because we're adding two things, right? So we specified the input by A and B, but we didn't specify the output. So to let Python know like what we want returned from the function, you have to type in a special keyword and it's called return. And pretty much anything you put after return will get returned back. So now let's run it. And now you can see 4 has been returned. And then one interesting thing about functions is that any code after return will never get run. So if I put a print statement like it didn't get run, because what happens is you enter the function, you do this line of code, you do this line of code, and then since you return, you go back to this line right here, and this one will never get run. So just be aware of that when you're writing functions. So one other interesting thing about functions is that variables inside functions are not accessible outside functions. So for an example, I want to print out the sum. You can see I get an error and it says the sum is not defined, which kind of doesn't make sense because I have the sum here. But like the way I kind of like to think about functions is like they're like kind of in their own little like bubble or like parallel universe or whatever. So anything inside of them can't be accessed by anything outside of it. The only way to pass things and to pass data inside a function is through the inputs, or like they're also called parameters. And the only way to get something out of a function is through the return. And that's called scope. So basically like the scope of the function is everything inside, and this variable is out of scope of the main program. So let's just get rid of that. Yeah. And yeah, to call a function, you just type the name, parentheses, and you put in inputs. So are there any questions about functions? Everyone's good? All right, I can move on to conditionals. So conditionals have a couple operators. So let me just go over those real quick. So there's less than, greater than, less than or equal to. So you do that by doing a less than and an equal to, and greater than or equal to, not equal to, which has a little exclamation mark. And then you have equal to, which is 2 equals. So the difference between this and this is that the single equal is used when you're assigning a variable. But if I want to say like, is 5 and 5 equal to each other, I have to use this equal to. So this is the logical equal to. All right. So like, just to give you an example, like let's say 2 is greater than 3. So these conditionals, they return, or these little operators, they return Booleans. So if I do this, you can see that this is false because 2 is not greater than 3. If I do something like not equal to, you'll see it returns true because 2 and 3 are not the same thing. So how can we like use these? We can use these in like anything, but you can also use them in like if statements. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with like if statements in Excel, but this is kind of similar. So there's 3 types of if statements. There's an if, an elif, and else. So if is just like an if statement. Elif stands for else if, and it gets run if this if is not met. Then else is kind of like the default condition. So it's like if none of the else ifs and ifs are met, then do an else. So let's do an example of this. So let's write a function real quick. And it'll have an input of just a number. So let's say if num is less than 0, I want to return negative. Right? Oh, and sorry. After an if statement, you want to put the colon to let Python know that the code after this that's indented, it belongs to the if statement. So that code that's indented will be run if this condition right here is met. And then what if it's not less than 0? Else if num is equal to 0, return 0. It doesn't really matter what quotes you use. I just like using the double quotes more than the single quotes. So that's why I changed it. And then if the number is not 0 and it's not negative, then that means it has to be positive, right? So we don't need to write, if we really wanted to, we can do else if num is greater than 0, but we don't really need to do that because there's only one possible option left. So we can just do else. And else doesn't need a condition. Else is just the default case. So we put a colon right here and then we do return and then positive. So let's just go over how this works. So let's call the function and let's give it -1. Oops, print answer. All right, so let's run this code real quick. Oh, oops, I forgot my colon here. Yeah, so make sure you have the colon after an else and an ifs. So as you can see, it's returned negative. So what happened was it went to num, it checked this one first. It says, is it less than 0? Return negative, and it didn't check the rest. If I do func 0, it returns 0. So it checked this, and then since this one was not satisfied, it checked this one, and it was 0. And then if I do 1, it checked this one, that condition wasn't satisfied. It checked this one, that condition wasn't satisfied. And then this one is like the last case scenario. So that's why it returned positive. So you might be thinking, what's the difference between if and elif? Why isn't this one just another if statement? And I'm just going to go over that real quick. So else if is only run if the if is not met, but an if will always be run. So let's create a little like thingy that we can just, I can show you to demonstrate. So let's say x is equal to 0. So then if true, so this will always run, right? Because the condition is true. If true, x equals x plus 1. So we're just going to add a value to x, or yeah, 1 to x. And then else if true, x equals x plus 1. And then let's just print out x and see what happens. So as you can see over here, since this if statement was true, it added 1 to x. And then since this one was run, it didn't even bother to check this one, right? So that's why x was 1. But if I do if true, and I run this, you can see that x is true. So this one got run, and it doesn't care about that, the fact that this one got run. It still ran this one. So that's the kind of the difference in like, that's when you would use if versus else if. And you can't have an else if on its own or an else on its own. You need to have them attached to at least an if. So yeah. Any questions on conditionals? All right, I'm going to move on to loops. All right, so loops are pretty powerful. It kind of allows you to utilize one of like the computer's greatest like strengths, like just to repeat things over and over and over and over again and do it really fast. So there's two types of loops. There's a while loop and there's a for loop. And so I'm going to talk about both of these, and pretty much in like pretty much almost situation, you can, and sorry, in pretty much every situation, you can use either a while loop and a for loop interchangeably, and it won't really matter. But sometimes it's easier to program something with a for loop rather than a while loop, or a while loop rather than a for loop. So let's go over some examples. So I'm going to iterate through a list. Iterate just means to go through. So let's create a list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And let's say I just want to print out every single value in a list on a new line. So let's start by doing a while loop. While loops just run while a condition is satisfied. So for example, if I did like while, okay, let's create a variable called index. We'll set it equal to 0. And I say while index, and just to remind you that the index is on all these. This is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we can accomplish this by accessing each individual element by its index and printing that out. So index will be 0, and we'll say while index has to be less than 6, right? Or less than 7, because 6 is the last index. But how do we know that the last index has to be less than 6? What we can do is use one of the built-in functions called length, and that will pretty much calculate the list of this, sorry, the length of this list, and return a number. So the length of this list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is index will never be greater than, so while index is less than 7, we want this loop to keep running. So then after that, we put colon to let Python know that all the code after this belongs to the loop. And let's do print. And then we want to access the list, the name of the list that we want to access, then brackets, and then the index. So let's run this. As you can see, it just infinitely keeps printing out 1. And you're like, why is it printing out 1? It's because I set the index to 0, and it's just printing out the index, but the index is always 0. So the index is never greater than the length of the list. So that's why the loop keeps running. So one way we can kind of fix this is by doing index equals index plus 1. So you're going to be using this a lot. So one kind of shorthand way to do that is to do index plus equals 1. And that's the same thing as writing index equals index plus 1. So now if we run the code, it'll give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that is what we wanted to do. Any questions on the while loop? Okay, so I'm going to go over a for loop. So for loop just iterates for the amount of times that you specify. So what we can do, so we need to get the index. So how are we going to get the index of this, the indexes of this list? One thing you can do is use the range function. So the range function gives back kind of like, it's not a list, but it gives back like an iterable. So if I get like type in, for example, range 5, it'll give me back 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can imagine that like since the length of the list is 7, if I do something like range 7, it'll give me back 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we can use that to iterate through the indexes. So what I want to do is type in 4, and then you can just type in any arbitrary like name for a variable. So you can do like num, do x, you can do like your name if you really want to. It doesn't really matter. I just like to use x. So for x in, and the thing you want to iterate over. So we want to iterate over these indexes, right? So, and how many indexes are those? That's the length of list 3. But then we want the range of that. So we do the range of the length of list 3. So this will give us back just the range of 7. So for x in that, now x is going to be equal to, on each iteration, x is going to be equal to this, 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 and this. So we do print list 3 and then x. So now if I run that, oh, I put the wrong list. Yes, now if we do that, it prints out every single value in the list. So any questions on the for loop or like using range and length? All right, so there's also another type of for loop. It's like a for each loop. And like you might be thinking like range and length is like kind of like annoying and like kind of complicated. So there's a simpler way to just do this. So let me comment this out. And what you can do is you do you start the same way, just for x in, but then you just type the name of the thing you want to iterate over. So we want to iterate over this list, right? So if I do list 3 colon, what I can do is just do print x, and that'll also just work. So that's like another way you can iterate through everything. So the last thing I want to talk about is just a pretty like important function. So it's called the input function. So the way this works is you just type in, so let's say x equals, then input, and then you type in the prompt. So you have to type it in as a string, right? So let's say enter a value. And now if we run our code, you can see in the terminal right here, it says enter a value. And what we can do is type in a number. Oh, let me do this. So we enter a number and see it prints out that number back. So that's one way you can kind of just prompt your user for input. So let's print out, let's say I want to square this number. So I want to print out x squared. So I'll enter 5, but then I got an error. So it says type error, unsupported operands, power for string and integer. That's because the input function returns a string to you. So I want the number 5, but it's actually returning me this. So one thing you can do to get rid of that is you have to do something called casting. And casting is switching between the data types. So you can do it with this because you have like a number and you can switch that number into a number string into like an actual number. And the way we would do this is by typing int. Int is like another built-in function that casts that input into, or that string into an integer. So now if I run this code, you can see that it returns 25. Any questions on like input and casting?
Well, that's all we had, right?
Yeah, so that's all we had.
I realized that there's something I forgot to cover is string operations. So I'll cover that real quick right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so string operations, it's similar to number operations where you use the same like operands. So let's say this can kind of be related to what Conman was doing in that last portion right there with the input. So let's say we want 5 times 2. So as you imagine, that would just print 10 right there. But then let's say we got an input from the user and the input ended up just being like the number 5 in quotations, which is a string. So this is actually able to run. It just gives you 2 5s in a row like that. So like Conan mentioned, if you want to change it to into a integer, you can just use the int function and it should just give you 10. And then there's also, you can add 2 strings together in order to concatenate them. And essentially what concatenating is just putting 2 words or 2 characters together. So this can be done using kind of just similar to how the multiplication was. You can do just 5 in parentheses plus 5, and that should give you 55 right there. So that's just another thing that you can do with these operands. And sometimes they give you values that you don't want, but since you know that this can be done, it helps you kind of figure out what you need to do, or what you want to do with whatever code or program that you're writing. And yeah, all right. I think that is
one more thing about strings. Let's say you want to access an individual character inside a string. You can do this. You can do that using the same way you do it with a list. So you can access like different letters.
Yeah. So if you have like a word right here, and you want to access the A in the middle, so that'd be like Conan mentioned. I can put it right here. This would be index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. Yeah. So if you want the A that's in the middle, you would just you would use the brackets like you did with list and just put in index 3, and that should return you the A. And then like he mentioned with the splicing, you can also put the colon, starting with the index that you want. So I just want the A and the T in the middle. So then you would end with index 5. And then it prints index 3 and 4, since the 5 is exclusive. That way you'll get the AT right there. So yeah, that's one thing that you can do with strings as well.
One thing about strings though that you have to be careful about is like, remember how I changed the true to a false in a list? You can't do that with strings. So like that A, if I wanted to change it to like an E, you can't do that. You have to create a new string with that letter changed. So yeah. Any questions just overall and about Python, or are we covered? But yeah, we have some time. If you guys want, is there anything else you want to like see done or anything? Or
yeah.
Can you go over list comprehensions?
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, it's been a while since I did list oh, let me share my screen. It's been a while since I did that. So, let me just type it out real quick and make sure I still remember how to do it. Okay, yeah. So basically, so this is the same as writing. This is the same thing as writing this. It's just a shorthand version. So what you want to do is, so you start off by just putting it in brackets, right? Because it's like a list. And the first thing is what you want to be inside the list. So let's do a new one. So you do x squared, right? So that's what's going to be appended to the list. X squared 4, and then what I want. So x in, let's say range 10, right? And if I print this out, it'll square all the numbers from 0 to 9. So it's just like basically doing this, but all in one line. And then like, so this written out would be it would just be like that. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. All right, for sure. Yeah, that's like a shortcut you can use. I pretty much never use it because I feel like I never end up doing this, or if I have to, I just end up doing this. So yeah. Any other like things you guys want to see?
I think we're good. Yeah. So for sorry, if anyone has any questions, you can ask. But for our next workshop, for our next Python workshop, which will hopefully be towards the end of the quarter, we'll be using going over pandas, which is a module that you can use or program within Python that you can use that is very intuitive with data analytics. So it makes stuff like working with large lists and data frames a lot easier without having to do like the whole figure out what loop to make, and if like a loop goes wrong, what you have to fix it or how you have to fix it. It kind of does all that work for you. So it makes that stuff a lot easier. And that'll be more tuned towards data analytics too. So we're excited for that. All right. Well then, yeah, if any questions come up, if you continue working with Python, you can feel free to email me or email QUAC or DM us on Instagram. There's always someone looking at those outlets.
Yeah. If you want to learn like more about Python, the way I learned Python, I watched this one video on YouTube. It's like 4 hours long. It's like Python for Beginners by Giraffe Academy. I like highly recommend that. So they just go over like kind of the same things and more. So definitely check that out if you're interested.